Hello, everyone. My name is Kendra Seymour, and I want to welcome you back to another Change the Air Foundation interview. I'm joined today by Holly Burns, who's going to be talking to us about her top 20 tips to reduce mold and to create a healthy indoor environment. So thank you, Holly, so much for being here.
Thank you. I
Now,
appreciate this opportunity.
I was so excited to connect with you. And when we were chatting, you brought up this top 20, and I was like, we have to talk about this because I know that people love lists. It's actionable. It feels like something tangible that they can do. But for those listening, if you don't know who Holly Burns is yet, she is the founder of the Action Consulting and Environmental Services, and she is a frequent guest speaker at restoration and insurance industry events. For over 16 years, she's devoted her career to protecting individuals from indoor air quality contaminants through testing residential and commercial buildings for various microbial, bacterial, and toxins that may be present. Holly has also provided educational courses on various topics concerning the restoration and mold remediation industry. She's dedicated her career to training industry professionals on correct mold remediation and water mitigation services as an improved IICRC instructor. In addition, she has written articles discussing the subrogation and insurance industry, methamphetamine lab cleanup, and biohazard remediation. Throughout her career in indoor air quality inspections and water damage mitigation, she has attained a diverse amount of education and knowledge to assist with creating healthy indoor air quality environments for occupants, workers, and visitors who reside and work in the areas of concern. She is a current PhD scholar practitioner in environmental epidemiology and looks forward to contributing to indoor environmental industry through her dissertation and possible public policy changes. That is amazing, Holly. Your story, what you're about, your awareness, your education, your policy, advocacy, all of it is super impressive, and I'm so glad you're here today.
Thank you again.
So let's get started with these top 20 tips, because I think one of the challenges for homeowners is it seems one so insurmountable. Where do I start? Do little changes even matter? And there's really a lot that people have control about that they may not even be aware of. So let's start with your number one. What's your first tip for us?
Relative humidity. So relative humidity is crucial in not just mold, but also viruses, bacteria, dust mites. If you're allergic to dust mites, you want to control that. And we, as homeowners and occupants, have the ability to do so for very, very little cost. You can get a thermal hygrometer. Sometimes they're called thermal hygrometer or digital thermal hygrometers, which is basically a thermometer, an indoor thermometer, plus it measures how much moisture is pretty much in the air. And you can do that through Amazon Prime or at your local hardware store like Home Depot, Ace, or Lowe's in the landscaping aisle. And so what is a best relative humidity is between 30 to 50%. Once you start creeping over 60%, it then begins to be a little bit of a problem. Possibly it could be your air conditioning system. It could be that there's too much moisture from the outside coming into the home through infiltration. So it really just want to try to make it as best as you can, 30 to 50, 55%. Again, once you start creeping over 60%, you have an opportunity for mold to begin to start growing. Over 70%, it's excessively conducive. So that 30 to 50% is our target range. If you're allergic to dust mites can be controlled in your home less than 50%. So that is the target. And the way to control it is with this digital thermal hygrometer. And it goes into conjunction with your thermometer or your temperature gauge in your home. So you can adjust because everybody's air conditioning system or furnaces are so different throughout the United States, but you can adjust it to make it fall within that 30 to 50%. If you're having difficulties doing that, possibly you need to call an air conditioning contractor to have it maintained and see what's going to do a maintenance program possibly. But that is the key, the relative humidity, because it does help with colds, flus, viruses, like I said, and then of course mold.
And you know what is so important? I don't think I bought my first hygrometer until, the last 5 years or experience. And now I give them out as stocking stuffers, because even just the little ones that you can keep on each floor, because your humidity changes, it can change from level to level. So it's important to be aware of that. But it's interesting that you brought that up, because I know I used to be a teacher, and the school that I worked at, budget cuts many years ago, what they started to do was to turn off the heating and air conditioning system after 4 p.m. and on the weekends. And there was a 4-day weekend, and I'm in humid Virginia, and the teachers all came back, and it was August. And over the 5 days, white mold had appeared growing on everything in an entire wing of the building, over all the furniture and everything. And it's because they were turning off the heating and air conditioning systems to save money, and that was providing a level of dehumidification. So crazy to think about, but definitely something to, it's an easy thing you can monitor that can save you a lot of money in the long run. Would you agree?
Oh my goodness, most certainly, because you can have a microbial bloom, which could just not necessarily from a pipe break, but because of your air conditioning system, like you said. Um, and an air conditioning system is the best dehumidifier. It works really well as a dehumidifier. So if you turn it off, or I think in one of my numbers here in my top 20 tips, um, turning it to fan can also allow for humid air outside to come in to that area. So having it on auto and using that air conditioning system as it should be is crucial to maintaining a healthy indoor air quality.
Yeah. And I love that, because I know we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail, because that's the question I see all the time about, what do I set it, auto or fan, or what is it? All right. So number 2, what do you have?
So you use ceiling fans or some kind of fan, because what we look at is I always use the acronym HAT, but I add an extra T onto it. So HAT. So H is for humidity, which we just talked about, and the relative humidity, basically controlling that humidity between 30 to 50%. A, which is where we are here, is airflow, increasing that airflow in that environment, not letting it just sit for mold to have the ability to just sit and grow on a food source is also really important. So not having a closed environment that has no airflow. The air conditioning system also helps with airflow too. The next T is temperature, as we talked about with uh, your gauge, your thermostat. So the temperature is going to assist with helping that humidity level. And then the next T I use is time. So we have humidity, airflow, temperature, and time. How much time does it take for growth to occur? And in your situation, you said over a long 4-day weekend at the school, it occurred during that particular time. So I use that hat to gauge, what am I trying to monitor? What am I trying to control here? The humidity, we can't. The airflow, we most certainly can. Having a closet that is stock full of things, and you have the door shut and there's no air conditioning flow coming in or out, can potentially create, if the conditions are favorable, can create mold to grow just within that little environment. So airflow is really helpful, and using a ceiling fan can help increase that airflow.
So I absolutely love that. HATT. That's a quick thing that we can all remember when we're thinking about our indoor air. Are we controlling the humidity and the airflow and the temperature and the time? I love all that. That is amazing. So we may have to make a social media post about just that acronym alone. Number 3.
Is regular dusting and cleaning,
Okay.
because we're looking at food source. We need, for mold to grow, we need enough water, whether it's from humidity or a pipe break. We need enough water in that environment, and then it needs something to essentially eat. Mold is our best decomposition in the world, in the environment. Otherwise, we'd be piled high to the moon in trash. So we need it, and it's always around us outside. But what it consumes is organic food, organic, not necessarily food, but organic things, items in your home. So think about in your closet. I just gave the scenario of the closet: leather, suede, are sweat on a jacket or any skin cells that are there. Um, Recently, I just did an inspection and I went into the property and you could see where this gentleman was sitting because you could see his head area and his arms. And the things that he most frequently touches, right? So the sweat or the skin cells will lay there. And when its conditions are favorable, and in this case, it was atmospheric and a pipe break, it was both. So he had relative humidities at 67% for about 2 months. And you could see where that growth was occurring right where he sits. Sometimes I go in and I see where people lay down and the growth is on one pillow. Say they're only sleeping on one pillow. You see that. So it's really interesting for me. It's like microbial forensics. In fact, that's what it's called, to go in and determine where is this mold coming from and why is it occurring. So keeping the home clean, dust free, relatively speaking, can reduce that food source for mold.
So I know this could probably be its own episode, but do you have any like cleaning tips, things that you use in your own home that you recommend?
Not necessarily cleaning tips, but we'll talk about air filtration devices. So if you have an air filters for your air conditioning system, but if you have pets, there are certain air filters that you need to probably look into. The other thing is the cleaning products that you use. So any cleaning product that you use, I try my best to use a natural or organic product, just because anybody breathing it could have what's called multiple chemical sensitivity disorder, where they're sensitive to certain chemicals that are out there. So really know what product you're going to be even wiping your countertops off with. The other suggestion is to look at the back of the label. All products are registered with the EPA. And so they are registered in that particular manner. How you spray it, how if there's dilution, water to chemical or water to product ratios, and how much time it's supposed to sit on that surface to do what it needs to do. So the dwell time is what we call it, is really important as well. And that's what I would say with the products that you're going to use in the cleaning you're going to use. I would also say if you see a lot of dust kind of building up quickly and you're looking, you say, geez, I just, dusted all of this. Look at your air filter as well, because that may be an indicator that it needs to be changed. Your filter might need to be changed if you see that.
Yeah, I love that. It's super important, especially those who've been exposed to maybe mold in the past and become sick. You tend to become very sensitive to a lot of additional odors and things. And one of the things I love about the IACRC is that it's not a reliance on harsh chemicals, right? It's actually simple, right? You need, sometimes a soap, a surfactant really is going to do wonders for you. You don't need some expensive product. You don't need something that, is crazy because I think people sometimes confuse that clean has a smell, right? And you don't necessarily need that to be true. In fact, clean shouldn't have a smell. Even though you might want ocean breeze wafting through your home, that's not a natural scent for a reason. How about number 4? This is a big one.
Yeah, forever, I think we've been told to use bleach.
Yeah.
And so many times I come in and I do an inspection and they say, oh, well, I used bleach to clean it. But bleach really isn't the best product for mold. It is good for, say, bacteria. Again, reading that label on the back and the dilution ratio, because it's a 3/4 cup of bleach to a gallon of water, I believe is what it says. And that's a lot of water. And we know that mold needs water to grow. So it'll stain it with a sodium hypochlorite. It will stain it, but you're feeding it with additional water, especially on drywall or sheetrock and wood. Solid surface countertops, again, read it, look at the dwell time, see if it's appropriate for that. Also, it does say on some of the bleach what it's good for, what type of mold, which is really interesting to me because I just think there are so many different types of mold. And that's why having somebody come in and inspect the home and sending it off to a lab to determine what type of mold is there will help with the cleaning efficacy and the process of it. So, not to use bleach, but read the directions on cleaning products and use them effectively. And I would say not to use bleach, not in totality, but not to use bleach for mold, especially on drywall or wood products.
Yeah, that's really important. And I know for a time the government websites all said that, but they're all slowly changing over to say don't use bleach. But there's still a few out there that will have it as a recommendation. But there are better options. How about number 5?
So smoking, and in the gentleman's house that I went into the other day that I was telling you about the the chair, there was a strong smell of nicotine. And so not to say that that's the only reason, but it definitely is a contributor because it is a food source. Nicotine is a food source. So that is something to think about when we're looking at our healthy indoor air quality and what our breathing and what we're breathing and what's coming into our lungs is really important in this building envelope, this tight building space that we now live in with less air changes now as we're getting to tighter building envelopes. So not smoking indoors, I think is a big one. It's definitely a contributor.
Yeah. And that's so true. I think, the way we build homes now, it's great that we're being more conscious about energy efficiency, but there are some trade-offs and things that other problems that we're going to need to solve. And perhaps that's a conversation for another time. We can talk about ventilation and filtration and things like that. But definitely
Sure.
something to be mindful of. How about number 6?
Change the air conditioner filters regularly. And that's going to be dependent on your system, the system and how often you need to, how many pets you have in the home, how much dust and dirt you may have. You can gauge that, like I said before, by how much dust you're seeing. If you're seeing a large accumulation of it, it might be time. And some of the filters will tell you how often to change that filter. But having a filter that's pleated, the pleating of it captures 7 times the more surface area to capture any dust or debris or particles that might be floating around in your airspace. So pleating is important. And I also say a MERV 8 or greater. So the filters are rated based off MERV ratings, and MERV stands for minimum efficiency reporting value. I went to my son's place and he had a MERV 1, and I'm thinking a MERV 1, that's just going to allow so many particles just to float through. And again, you can get these on Amazon, or even I get them at my grocery store sometimes, and it's not much more expensive to go up in your MERV rating. The only thing I would caution is that once you go up higher, so they go from a scale from like 1 to 16. Once you go up higher, it can restrict the airflow into your air conditioning system. So I'd like to say an 8 or 11 would be really good because that allows particles to float through, but it traps a large majority of them, and it's okay for your air conditioning system. But I would definitely have a conversation with your air conditioning contractor if you're having your AC or your furnace maintained, to have a conversation with them and ask them what they think is appropriate, but look at that MERV rating. If you can get a MERV 8 and begin there, start there and see. But some people don't put filters in their AC at all. And I think, gosh, it's not, nothing is being trapped through that. So look at your air filters. Sometimes people will write the date that
Yeah.
they change it, which I think is so smart, on the outside of the filter. So the last time I changed it was this. If you're on a 2-month or a 1-month type of regular changing of your air filter.
Depending on where you're in the world, add that to your spring cleaning list. If you've never changed your filter, definitely go change it. If you're not sure what the rating is, go check that out. But that's something you want to be doing, what, twice a year at least? Or how often would you change them?
Well, again, it depends on how many different things are happening, but I would say some people say change them every month.
Yeah.
Some people change them every 3 months. But I would say definitely on a regular schedule, to make sure that they're changed. And you'll see once you change them, you'll see how dirty it is and if it needs to be changed.
Yeah, it's really eye-opening. I mean, in an intriguing and kind of gross way at the same time. All right, how about number 7?
Number 7 is pay attention to dust buildup around air conditioning grills or HVAC supply registers. Look at that and see, because you may have an issue either with the air conditioning system or the ducts might need to be cleaned. And so if your ducts might need to be cleaned, that could be a contributor to an odor. We call it MVOCs, the odor, the gases from the mold. You might be smelling something musty, but you don't see anything. Look at the air conditioning. You may need your coils cleaned, but you might need your ducts to be cleaned, and make sure that they are cleanable, because some ducts are HVAC ducts are not cleanable. And then that's a conversation that you'd want to have with the air conditioning system again about replacing the ducts. But that is important to see the buildup around AC grills or supply registers.
We don't have to get into too much, but I know that cleaning your air ducts, there's a lot of there can be some controversy around that, and some, I think there's a couple 2020 reports many years ago about scams. Is there an industry reference we can tell people when it comes to that they know that they're getting a reliable
Yes,
person? Okay.
absolutely. And it's NADCA. And they follow, I believe it's the 2013 now, um, air conditioning restoration process. So they follow a guide just like IICRC. And they have a website, NADCA does, that you can actually put your zip code in and find somebody who's a national air duct cleaning certified technician. You can put that in, and it's a pretty exhaustive effort to become NADCA certified. So they follow that. And I definitely recommend somebody who's NADCA certified to determine whether your air ducts are cleanable, whether they should be cleaned, or maybe they don't, and maybe you can't because of the age of the property. So that is definitely an industry that I would recommend.
Yeah. So we'll link to that too for anyone listening on the website so you can find that easily. It's a great resource. How about number 8?
8, again, humidity. We just talk about humidity so much. I live in Florida, and you have condos that are on the ocean. So the ocean has a lot of water right there. It's inevitable. And we call them snowbirds, but they come here for the winter and they go back north for the summer, and they close everything up with their hurricane shutters. Typically, they'll turn their AC off. And then you've got your time. So you have high humidity levels coming into that condo. It's a tight building envelope because you have hurricane shutters. So there's no airflow for air conditioning, and higher temperatures. So there's my hat, right?
Yeah.
And then my last T of time. You've got about 6 months time for it to grow. So we see in the fall when they come back, it's just a lot of people have growth on furniture and walls. And it's just that humidity. The other area where humidity can be an issue is in your bathroom. So when you're taking a shower, most people, or I shouldn't say most, but many people do not use their exhaust fan because they don't like the noise. But using that exhaust fan is so important because you've got hot and warm water coming up, and it's just staying there. It's got to find a place. If you have the exhaust fan on and it's exhausted properly out of the home, because sometimes they'll exhaust it into the attic and you're just letting hot, warm water into the attic space, that could cause a problem. So if it's exhausted properly out of the home, it's taking that moisture out into the outdoor environment. And I usually say about 8 minutes after you shower, keep it running. I added in our home, in our bathroom, we have one that is Bluetooth, so I can listen to the radio or news or podcast, and it's not as bad, and it makes me want to use it. And then I got one off of Amazon for my son that he could use, so it encouraged him when he was a teenage boy to use that exhaust fan when he's showering. And so yeah, the bath fan, allowing the fan to run after completion, and usually running the bath fan, like I said, about 8 minutes after showering will help. If you don't have an exhaust fan, some older homes don't have exhaust fans in their home, leaving that door open from the bathroom to the adjacent room and allowing that moisture, we know in physics, wet goes to dry. So allowing that wet air to go to dry to create a balanced environment is also important. And so that would be number 8 is about reducing that humidity.
Yeah, no, I love that. Is one, especially with kids, you have to use the bath fan for the entire shower and after. And then to, make sure that it's properly working. I know I've lived in rentals like in my younger days and, it like barely did anything. So make sure it's in working order. And then one of the things I know when we, redid bathrooms over the last few years is we really paid attention to that cubic feet per minute, making sure that the bath fan was sized properly, because I think sometimes people will buy the cheapest one and then, now these days people are building bigger and bigger bathrooms and it's kind of not doing anything. So, there's resources online, but make sure you match that square footage too. So
Yes, and to that point, on the back of a lot, when we got ours at Lowe's or Home Depot, but on the back it had the CFMs, the cubic feet per minute. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's fantastic. So you can gauge it on the back of the package as well, just like you can on the filters with the MERV. It will have that information on the back of the package.
yeah. And is it, do you have a recommendation for the air exchanges per hour? I think when I researched it, it said something like 8 was a good one, or do you have a number in mind?
Well, in the industry, in the mold industry, typically what you'll see is between 4 to 6 air changes per hour. And that all came from the asbestos abatement. So a lot of the mold remediation comes from that asbestos abatement, but 4 to 6, 8 is great. 8 is great. So if you want to try 8, that would be great too, because that's allowing more air changes
Yeah.
to come out of that room, especially when it's wet and the heat is up.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that.
Mhm.
So 8 minutes and maybe 8, air exchanges per hour. All right. Number
Sure.
9.
I think I touched on this a little bit about leaving interior closet doors or doors, especially that don't have areas or spaces that don't have a lot of airflow. Leaving that door open partially will help with that airflow, which is that, hat. So leaving it for that ventilation. And if you're looking, say some of the older homes, you think they have those louvered bifold doors, and people are like, I don't really like that. I want to change it out for a solid door. But those louvers can actually help because it can allow for that airflow to change and take place. So really pay attention to your vents in those small closets or pantry areas and knowing that there's appropriate ventilation.
Yeah, that's so big. I have seen this many, many times. Like people, especially because we tend to stuff our closets, in this country. And so there's no airflow. There's a lot of things. And years will go by and they'll pull something out and then there'll be like mold growth in the corner, from humidity or on their things. And I don't know. I've seen it sometimes too. And our HVAC closets, we try to take up as little space as possible. So we put these units in these tiny, tiny spaces, and then there's no airflow, and you'll see mold growth sometimes. That's super helpful. And I guess an easy thing too, just crack open the door, leave it ajar. How about number 10?
Remove spoiled food and household trash regularly. Again, this kind of goes back to, I believe, I'm looking, I think number 3. So taking the food out regularly or trash regularly, again, it's a food source. So it aligns with number 3, regular cleaning and dusting and taking household trash out, because we don't want to have a food source there for mold to grow when conditions are favorable and we have either a water loss or high humidity levels.
Yeah. And I'm sure we've all been victims to that. Something gets pushed in the back of even your refrigerator, and then you find it a little later and you're like, oh, that's really gross. So, add that to your spring cleaning list too, if you haven't thought about your refrigerator. Number 11, you talk about mops and wiping up spills. What thoughts do you have there?
Yeah, wipe up spills as quickly as you can, because if that water, you have a large amount, and I'm really talking about a large amount, not a little tiny spill, but my daughter, when she was little, we had one of those water, I think it's 2.5 gallons or something, where you open it up and you get the water. So she was thirsty in the middle of the night. She opened it up. She got her water, and I don't know whether she forgot to put it back or didn't put it back, or a little bit. So the next morning, we had water from this little water jug out in the middle of our kitchen, and so our wood floorings were trash. They were laminate floors, and they were peeling up, and it was continuous throughout the property. So had we known, or if you see a large amount of water, try and wipe it up as quickly as possible or mop it up as quickly as possible, because it goes to that time on my hat. It goes to that time. How much time are you allowing a lot of water or elevated humidity levels in that environment or in that space? Because that will allow, and we know water takes the path of least resistance, right? So it's going to migrate to areas that are dry. Wet goes to dry. So mop those up as quickly as you can, as quickly as you see them, if you can.
Yeah, okay, I get this question all the time, not to take us on a tangent, but especially if you have kids, mine have done this. If there is a spill like that and you get it up relatively quickly from the floor to save the flooring, right? Because like you said, it ran through your entire home. I imagine you probably ended up having to replace everything. It gets expensive. What else should they be putting bands on it? Like, is there other steps in case anything has kind of seeped into the floor that people would want to try to take, or does it not really make a difference at that point?
Well, it just depends. Mine was a very small little bit of water, but it did affect my kitchen. So, it really depends on how much water are we talking about. If we're talking about a lot of water, then you really should try and get it up as quickly as you can, but know that it's going to wick up walls, because we call capillary action. It's going to wick up walls. And if it's an exorbitant amount, then you really should contact a professional,
Yeah.
somebody who is IICRC certified.
Yeah, no, and that's important because at Change Your Foundation, we talk a lot about the S520, which has to do with mold remediation, but there's the S500, right? Which is, a water situation where it hasn't quite turned into the microbial growth. All right, how about number 12? We touched on this briefly, but there's a little bit more here about the HVAC system.
Yeah, keeping that system maintained. And that goes in line with, the coils, having a maintenance program for your air conditioning system, and looking at if there's any issues. Sometimes ducts can be loose up in the attic. That can cause condensation because you've got hot air touching a cold surface. You can create condensation. So having that HVAC maintained regularly, whether it's once a year, that's typical. That's typically what I see is the air conditioning contractor comes out, and it's once a year. And it's something to what you said before about where the air conditioning air handler is located is also something that you want to monitor. Is it up in the attic? Is it in your garage? Where is it located? And think about that hot air hitting a cold temperature, a whole cold surface, and creating condensation.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know if we'll touch on this later. I can't remember, but I think one of the things that we see with HVAC systems is people that they can be sources of like mold and other microbial growth, especially there's like the drip pan. Like when you have your HVAC service, go down with the technician and have him explain some of these things to you, because there's that drip pan under there that collects dust and moisture. And then you've created kind of a perfect storm for things, but maybe we'll touch on that later. I think, yeah, you
Yes.
talk about number 16. So we'll hold that thought then. So then how about number 13? Because I see this one all the time. So I'm super excited for you to talk about this. This is a hot debate, I think, in the online community.
So keeping your HVAC, again, look at where you're living too, and what the outside environment is. If the outside environment is hot and humid, or if it's cold and dry. So you really want to look at where you're living, whether that fan is appropriate or not, to put it on fan as opposed to auto. So auto is kind of recirculating that in the air. And when you set it to a temperature, it's going to kick on whenever it reaches whatever temperature that is, either for heat or for cold. When you have fan, it just runs constantly. And it has the capability of bringing hot, in my area in Florida, hot, humid air into the environment, and then it can create a microbial bloom. So know where you're living and gauge whether it's appropriate to use the fan or auto. In my area, in Florida, where it's hot and humid outside, I typically try to tell people to keep it on auto.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So generally speaking, again, 'cause I'm not making a single blanket statement here, keep your AC unit, the little setting on auto, not fan. Awesome. Thank you. Number 14, you talk about windowsills and condensation. What's going on there? We see that a lot.
So yes. So again, hot or humid area hitting a cold surface can create condensation. And also, you want to be sure that that window or that door is sealed properly. So maybe it's not sealed properly and you're just getting water from that, and you need to use a sealant or caulking around that window to make sure it's sealed. So really check whether it's a condensation issue on your windowsill. They have a marble windowsill, which is cold. We see condensation on our glass of the window. Sometimes we'll see condensation on HVAC grills, supply registers, because they're cold and the room is warm and hot. So it's reaching what we call dew point temperature or condensation. And that's when we see that occur. So we want to control that environment. Remember the temperature, the airflow, and the humidity are really important. So is it truly condensation, or is it the fact that the window is possibly leaking?
Yeah, I think that's what's frustrating for people when they post questions like that. It's like, well, it could be your indoor humidity, it could be a problem with the window itself. And sometimes people will say, okay, if I get, and I'm curious as your thoughts, maybe they'll get a little bit of mold growth on the windowsill. What do they do? Do they clean that off? Do they call a professional? Does it always mean there's a bigger problem with the window? What do you recommend to someone who sees maybe a little bit of mold growth there?
Yeah, yeah, that is a big question. So, um, 10 square feet is the industry standard. Do we see 10 square feet? And in Texas, it's 25 square feet contiguous, meaning touching. So a little bit different in Texas, which is where the whole mold remediation came from in the late 90s, but mid to late 90s, I should say. So uh yeah, if we see something that's over greater than 10 square feet, we want to call somebody who's certified, IICRC certified mold remediation technician to come out, or a mold assessor initially might be a really good thing as well, to have somebody come out and check it and say, hey, this is something to be concerned about or not really. But those are some good resources for you.
Yeah, so just be paying attention, especially, you're looking for maybe any larger systemic issues that are speaking to bigger issues in the home. And it's always handy
Sure.
to call an indoor environmental professional. We have some resources on our website on how to find one of those. So you can get a little bit more information. So number 15, you talk about water leaks.
Yes, water leaks, because we talked a lot about humidity, right? Which is where mold can come from, but also mold can come from a large water leak, a pipe break, uh, water heater, even air conditioning system, like you were saying, where the condensation line breaks or overflows. So look for these areas, and I have several areas that are key areas. Just take a look underneath your kitchen sink and have the water running and see if there's any drips. Make sure your backsplashes are sealed where the water touches the back, so it doesn't come back behind that backsplash and behind that cabinet. Look for toilet leaks. Look for uh, backups. If the water isn't flowing as great in your toilets and your shower, you may want to call somebody out, see if you have a backup. There are just some common areas, shower stalls, kitchens, your grout, the tile grout in the shower. Make sure that all the tile grout is sealed, that you aren't missing any grout and there's holes, because water can go back behind that as well. So I gave a list here: washing machine hoses, air conditioning drip pans, like you were talking about, kitchen and bathroom sinks. Just maybe take it probably would take you less than a half an hour just to go around and check everything and make sure it's nothing is leaking.
Yeah, and to check it regularly too, periodically go through and pull everything out underneath your sinks. And I know too, one of the misconceptions I had early on is that, well, if I don't see like actual mold growing, and really sometimes the secret is to look for that sign, those signs of water damage, right? Because it speaks to what's behind the baseboard, that bubbling, the cracking, all of that is sometimes the first clue that there's something bigger going on behind that toilet
Sure.
or whatever. So it's not always about looking for mold. It can be looking for the signs of water damage. What about number 16?
So we talked about using products that are registered and we're using them according to the label. But in number 16, we're specifically talking about air conditioning drip pans, like you spoke about before, which is so great. So use an approved biocide for that air conditioning drip pan, and that will help prevent mold accumulation as well. You can go to your local hardware store, and they should have approved products specific to your air conditioning drip pans.
Yeah, and it's important that the product is made for that purpose. Sometimes people will just use any old thing they have lying around, and you really want to make sure that it's designed for that purpose.
Sure,
Okay, number
sure.
17, you talk about vacuums and cleaning carpets regularly. Now, man, vacuums, that's a big marketing. There's, I mean, $50 vacuums, there's $1,000 vacuums. Can you talk to us about that, what we need to know or think about?
Yeah, carpet is it's interesting because it really can absorb so much debris. And if it's there for a while, again, we're looking at what is a food source for mold to grow and keeping them cleaned, especially if you have pets and they might have had accidents, making sure that they're clean because it goes underneath that cushion or that carpet padding as well. So it can get stuck there. And if we're vacuuming and we're cleaning those carpets regularly, then it allows for uh, the dirt, the dust, debris to be picked up. As far as what type of vacuum, you know, some of them do have the HEPA filters on it, and the HEPA is high efficiency particulate arresting filter. But to be a true HEPA filter, it needs to be 99.97% efficient, going down to zero point 0.3 microns. And the micron is the size of whatever particle is floating in space that it can actually capture that. So if you're reading the back of a vacuum and it has the HEPA, really look to see if it's going to those guidelines as well.
Yeah, and it's always a bonus when that system is sealed because you want to make sure that there's, nothing's leaking out, and you can do a lot of research into vacuums too. Yeah, I think I was doing some research a while back and I stumbled upon some, like, I think it was from the University of Arizona. It was talking about how your carpet has more bacteria than a toilet seat, and things like that. And you don't really think about that. So, even like shoes off before you walk in, anything you can do to minimize, and then that regular cleaning, I think, is going to go a long way. Number,
Sure,
yeah,
sure.
number 18. What do you have for us there?
So a humidistat. Some people, especially in hot, humid environments, will add a humidistat to their air conditioning system. And this is probably really the only one that's costly in this list because everything else is just you gauging, monitoring, or fairly inexpensive. But if you live in high humidity climates, consider adding a humidistat. And what that will do is it'll trigger once it gets over that relative humidity, whatever it's set at, whether if you want it set at 50% because you're allergic to dust mites or 60% because you're concerned about mold, you can set it or have the air conditioning contractor set it at whatever humidity. The only thing that I would be aware of is just to be sure that it does work properly. Some of them will have gauges that will come to your phones. Technology. I mean, it's incredible. So it will come to your phones. If you are a snowbird here in Florida and you're up north, then it will let you know, hey, your environment is going over 60%. So sometimes it will let you know that information, but I would just say, make sure that they're installed correctly and they work properly, especially if you're planning on using them when you leave for a long period of time. gauge it and see if it is working properly, and maybe even get one of the thermal hygrometers. And sometimes people set it on top. It's about this big. So they'll set it on top of the thermostat and just make sure that it is working properly.
Yeah. You mentioned technology. One of my other favorite tools is like, you can have the leak alarms, and there's all different kinds now. And if you're going out of town, especially, or if it's maybe a second home, and they can send alerts to your phone, but they're going to buy you some time. I have them under all my sinks, behind our toilets, our washing machine, anything that's going to, alert you a little sooner that maybe there's a leak. Cause it's Murphy's Law, right? It's going to happen when you go out of town for the weekend or right before a big event or a holiday and you're having people over. So that, anything to keep you abreast of what's going on in the home, I think is helpful. At
That is
number
true.
18, we talked about this, a little bit, but repair water leaks quickly. Anything else you want to add there?
Yeah, just make sure that you repair whatever issue it is. So if you have a roof leak, make sure that in our area, because of the hurricanes, it's been challenging to find roofers, but make sure that it is tarped appropriately, or turn the water shut off valve off if you're having issues. So even if you can't repair it right now by getting a plumber or a roofer or whatever's happening in your environment to allow water to intrude and migrate into the home, make sure that it's either turned off or it's sealed appropriately to not allow additional water coming into your home. But repair them as quickly as possible is really important.
And you'd feel like that would be common sense, but the number of times that people have failed to correct the moisture source, they'll go in and remediate, and then they don't actually correct whatever it is, and then it comes back. And then you're dealing with the problem. I see this more commonly, I think, in rentals, right? They'll just, oh, we're just going to paint over this, which, by the way, that's not remediation. Don't do that. You need to correct the source. Is it a leak? Is it humidity? Because otherwise your problem's just, you're kicking it down for another day to deal with. So thank you. And then the last one, number 20.
Yeah, we talked about this before, is to make sure that you're calling a certified water restoration professional. There are a lot of people out there that can do um, water restoration, and depending on the states, can also perform mold remediation, but they may not be certified. So ask them for their IICRC certification number, or they should have a little card. Ask them for that. Um, and for mold remediation, there are certain states, Florida is one of them, Texas is one of them, Louisiana, New Jersey after Superstorm Sandy. So there are states that have specific state guidelines that you have to be licensed. Know that licensure is different than certification. So the certification is through the IICRC, but licensure would be through that particular state.
And that's really important because people will always say, and maybe we can shift for a moment since we're wrapping up. One of the things I struggled with, I'm in the state of Virginia and there's zero regulations or certifications. I could go to bed tonight, wake up tomorrow, call myself a mold remediator, essentially, right? I don't necessarily need to have any training. And as a result, we hired initially, people that we thought, they were licensed contractors or they had the business and they had good reviews on Angie's List. And it turns out they weren't the best option for us. But we wasted a lot of time, money, and further compromised our house. So if someone wants to find a reliable resource, what website can they go to kind of start their research? You mentioned it briefly, but I want you to give another plug for it.
So IICRC, you can go onto their website, and you can actually, same thing as NACA, put in your zip code and it'll tell you all of the certified technicians in your area and certified companies as well. So you can put that information in and it will populate who's around your area, how far they are from your zip code. It's very helpful. And the training and the certification that is provided is pretty extensive. And they have to take an exam, so they would have to pass it. It's a pretty extensive process. I think that it's important for homeowners to be aware that this exists, especially during a catastrophe. like a hurricane or a flood. But also in your situation, Kendra, like, you had a mold remediation or a mold issue, and you tried to find somebody who was, you know, competent, but and you mentioned to protect your house, which is our valuable interest. A lot of people have a lot of financial interest in your home, but also your health. So we can have all of these things, homes, cars, but our health, if we don't have that, then that's an issue. So making sure that your house is protected, but also you and your loved one's health. It's critical to make sure that you have somebody who is trained properly.
Yeah, and we'll link to that website because it really, right now, it's the only accredited industry standards out there. And, something we've talked about, and I know you've talked about with my colleague Brandon before, that, mold remediation is not a very regulated business in most states. And so, what is true in one state could be very different. And I always tell people, I sometimes say remediation in quotes because someone in some state might define remediation as like fogging, and that's it. And someone else might be, well, I'm going to paint over it and throw some bleach on it, and they call that remediation. And then you can go all the way to the other side where you're setting up proper engineering controls and pressure and PP and all the processes, and that's the IICRCS 520. And many of these companies, it's voluntary, or there's a wide liberty that's taken for what can pass as remediation. So as the consumer, as someone who has lived it, who has made the many mistakes before, it's why I do what I do now, take the time to understand what good remediation looks like, and what you're looking for. Because I think it's Michael Pinto always says, sometimes, the only thing worse than no remediation is bad remediation. So you want to make sure that who you hire really has the most up-to-date training, has your interest at heart, has your health, at the forefront of not only you, but their workers. Sometimes too, that surprises me. I'll see, somebody will talk about it, and the workers doing the remediation have little to no protective gear on. And if they're not protecting their workers, they're not protecting you either. So are there any other thoughts you want to leave us with? I love that, you're about educating people, you're other people in the industry and stuff. Any words of wisdom before we wrap up here?
I just want to say that I think mold tends to get overlooked a lot of times, or there are so many different theories and thoughts about it. And you can look online and maybe get not the accurate information. And so have somebody who's certified, and really protect yourself and your family by doing, following these top 20 tips will definitely assist with that. But at the end of the day, your health of you and your loved ones and your home is really important.
I absolutely love that. For if someone wanted to get into contact with you for more information, how could they find you?
So you can find us online at www.ace-envr for environmental.com. So ace-envr.com. There's some information on there, some resources as well. And then they can always call me. It's, my phone number, if you want to put a link on there, or
Sure.
email me,
Yeah.
then I'm more than welcome to help anybody. So
Holly, thank you so much for taking your time today to share your top 20 tips and like your continued, I mean, you're going after your doctorate in this, right? And I love that you're a learner and an advocate. So thank you so much for everything that you do and for being here today.
absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And for everyone listening, thank you so much for joining us. If you haven't already, do me a favor, head on over to changetheairfoundation.org and sign up for our newsletter, because it really is the best way to get interviews, information, and tips just like this directly to your inbox. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.